Flowers die in 3 days. Matching underwear from MeUndies? That's a gift that lasts. MeUndies creates matching prints for couples and friends, same adorable designs in different cuts for each of you. All made from their signature ultra-modal fabric that feels impossibly soft. With 30 million pairs sold and 90,000 five-star reviews, MeUndies matching prints are the perfect gift. Valentine's Day is February 14th, so don't wait. Get exclusive deals up to 50% off at MeUndies.com/comfort, code COMFORT. That's MeUndies.com/comfort, code COMFORT.
Welcome to Men's Leadership God's Way. I'm your host, Don Wood. This is the place where men learn to lead with faith, clarity, and conviction. Together, we'll explore real stories and biblical principles to help you be a model of integrity in your career, family, and everyday life. Let's get started. Well, hello, friend. Today, I want to talk about responsibility. What is your ability to respond? And how did it develop long before you stepped into any kind of executive role or position of influence? What I want to explore today is how responsibility can become sustainable in your life. When I work with executives, one pattern shows up consistently. Responsibility for them developed much earlier in life, and it was often formed in environments where stability was uncertain, homes where emotions shifted quickly, where someone needed to stay alert, and peace wasn't a sure thing. In these situations, awareness meant protection. A child learns to read faces and notice a change in the tone of a voice, or they anticipate changes. Because when you're growing up in this kind of a home, being attentive will reduce risk and relaxing invites problems. And as life progresses, I believe that these early adaptations don't vanish. They actually mature and refine themselves. And then it transitions into competence, emotional control, and leadership presence because people begin to trust you when you remain composed. They lean on you when you notice things that others often miss. And from the outside, this looks like success and maturity. But inwardly, something crucial hasn't changed because your nervous system believes that vigilance is necessary for things to remain intact. Even when circumstances improve, your body never registers safety. You subconsciously believe your sense of obligation and readiness needs to remain engaged. And this is the intersection in your life where I believe responsibility starts to feel oppressive. Your internal system never learned how to disengage. Now, before I go any further, I want to be clear about something. I always wasn't responsible. In fact, there was a long stretch of my life where I lived in the opposite direction. Responsibility felt restrictive to me, and structure, well, that felt like pressure. Boundaries for me were disregarded instead of something to respect. Now, I didn't lack intelligence or awareness, but I made decisions based on impulse rather than wisdom. And I avoided accountability when it became uncomfortable for me. And what I would do is justify choices that actually cost me trust and stability with others. And at the time, it felt like freedom because I was avoiding everything because I didn't want to face the consequences of my behavior. And eventually, what happened was my patterns caught up with me and the consequences became inevitable because I could no longer outrun my irresponsibility. I lost control, credibility, and the illusion that I could keep choosing my way without paying a high price for it. And it forced a decision I hadn't been willing to make before. I could continue by living reactively, or I could learn how to live responsibly. and without becoming resentful in the process. And something unexpected happened over time because as I learned to show up consistently, to tell the truth, even when it cost me, to do what I said I would do, even when no one was watching, responsibility stopped feeling like imprisonment. It gave me structure and integrity in my relationships. Trust it was actually restored with others and eventually even with myself. And here's what surprised me the most, it made me a reliable guy. It took years to develop. And it's one of the reasons why I work with leaders today. Because many men will move from irresponsibility straight into over responsibility. They swing from avoidance to overfunctioning. I'll see them go from chaos to self imposed pressure. And of course, neither extreme is sustainable. Now, from what I've seen and learned, is that a great leader doesn't develop by taking on everything. A great leader is developed by becoming exceptional at learning how to be faithful with their integrity. And what's interesting is that when you look at Jesus and his leadership, you notice a fundamentally different relationship with responsibility. Now, if you look at his life, no one was more entrusted with obligation than he was. People depended on him, truth flowed through him, and yet his life was not marked by urgency or strain. He moved with clarity, not compulsion, and he acted with commitment rather than fear. He responded faithfully without everything depending on his involvement. And he understood who he was and who he wasn't. And I believe this is where many leaders drift into roles they weren't meant to have. And then responsibility slowly shifts from stewardship into survival. They begin to believe that if they're not constantly engaged, something will fall apart. And it governs their behavior in a very subtle way. Slowing down for them feels irresponsible. And when they go to rest, they think it's going to be risky for them. And stepping back, well, that's danger. But when you look at Psalm 127, it reminds us that your effort detached from God's involvement becomes empty labor. And this passage isn't meant to shame leaders. But you have to remember this, responsibility doesn't require you as a leader to become the ultimate source. And there are several costs from attempting to do everything on your own. There's a lack of joy when your life appears to be successful. People feel alienated when you believe your relationships are on solid ground. And for guys that have strong faith, God can seem distant to them, even though their prayer life is consistent. Now, from what I've seen, their productivity remains high, but they're out of touch with what's happening around them. And then something dries up for them internally. And responsibility becomes endurance rather than a calling. Now, the work still matters, but it no longer nourishes them or their teams. And Jesus never operated from depletion. For him, when the pressure intensified, he withdrew, he rested, and he prayed. And this would often disappoint people because they had a lot of expectations for him, but he went off and did it, and he didn't feel guilty about it. People needed him, yet he still chose to rest so he could reflect. And this wasn't neglect, it was actually, for him, spiritual wisdom. And we can learn something from that because I'll see leaders unravel when they attempt to function as the source for everything. And here's the thing, it's so tricky. It's subtle and relentless. And rest no longer restores their nervous system. And even after some time away, their body remains tense when they return. And for them, being needed feels like stabilizing for them, and delegation is unsettling. And there are all these signals. Responsibility becomes the source of their identity, safety, and worth. And yet, from what I've seen, one of the most important shifts for a leader is to distinguish between responsibility that belongs to them and what's assumed out of habit or fear. Because a wise leader will ask, well, what would happen if I step back? Or who would step in if I didn't remain involved? Responsibility becomes sustainable when it is shared and aligned with their teams, and it becomes destructive when they remain isolated from them. Do you ever feel like you're leading on the outside but running empty on the inside? Hi, I'm Don Wood, founder of Men's Leadership God's Way. I work one-on-one with executives and leaders who are ready to trade burnout, confusion, and isolation for clarity, confidence, and peace. My coaching is designed to help you to lead with conviction without sacrificing your health, faith, or family. If you're ready to experience the transformation you've been searching for, visit mensleadershipgodsway.com and let's start your journey today. This is a good time now for me to offer a few practical steps that you can apply this week. Now, you'll notice how responsibility will be guiding your life when you do these things. Take these one at a time, and there's no need to rush them. And the first thing you can do is this. Identify one area where responsibility feels like a real burden in your life. It might be work itself, a relationship, finances, or faith, or even the expectations that others place on you. And notice where it feels draining rather than life-giving for you. Ask yourself, what am I trying to manage here that feels exhausting rather than aligned for me? Now, another thing you can do is this. Ask yourself this question. What is responsibility doing for me internally? Now, responsibility often serves a hidden purpose. For some men, it provides control. Others, it's an identity for them. And for some guys, it keeps their anxiety at bay. But ask yourself honestly, if I stop managing this situation so tightly, what would I be afraid of losing? Would it be approval, stability, self-worth, control? And then acknowledge to yourself what surfaces. And next, separate what responsibility belongs to you from what's assumed. Now, write this down if you can. What are you truly responsible for? What outcomes, roles, or emotional weight have you taken on? Responsibility becomes sustainable when your role is identified clearly. It becomes damaging when it remains vague and unspoken. So ask yourself, what part of this situation requires my involvement and what could be shared, delayed, or released? And then finally, practice one intentional release this week. And keep in mind, you're not quitting, you're just becoming discerned with what the situation is. So release one unnecessary check in. It could be a mental loop, an outcome you've been rehearsing, or a task that could be delegated to someone else, or even paused. But notice how your body responds when you do this. And this will tell you more than your thoughts ever could. Create 15 minutes of space every day without solving, planning, or preparing. Allow your quiet time to reveal what pressure has been masking. This is recalibration. And responsibility that flows from awareness will restore your leadership. When it's driven by fear, it will deplete you. Now, I want to slow down and invite reflection. Let's ask Jesus some questions without rushing for the answers. And the first one is this. Jesus, what responsibility am I holding on to that you never wanted me to do? Now, with this question, resist the urge to explain or justify. Just notice what surfaces. And in my experience, your insight often begins with discomfort, but it does deserve your attention. Here's another question you can ask: Jesus, where do I confuse being responsible with being indispensable? Now, this question will touch on your identity rather than your behavior, and it often points to something that once protected you, but it no longer serves your life or your leadership. And the final question you can ask Jesus is this: what would it look like to trust you with outcomes instead of trying to manage every possibility myself? Now, this question is about surrendering to God. Trust Him to shape your daily decisions, and this will redefine your strength because it isn't measured by how much pressure you can tolerate. And this is developed through discernment, humility, and I believe the willingness to release what was never meant to be held alone. And Jesus demonstrated this all the time. He trusted the Lord with his process. Obedience for Jesus was enough for him. And leaders who learn to live with responsibility in this way become steady and present. They react less with impulse, and they don't internalize the pressure. They lead from identity rather than anxiety. Their leadership endures, and what happens is that their relationships will have more depth. Their joy returns, and it's not because they're doing less, they're just living differently. Now, as we close, I want to speak directly to the part of you that feels tired but functional. And I want you to remember that you're not weak for feeling the pressure in your life. And you're not failing because leadership might feel overwhelming to you. The truth is, you were never meant to navigate all of this responsibility by yourself. Responsibility is to be lived in trust, community, and dependence on God. Let's close in prayer. Jesus, you see the pressure we face long before we feel it. You know where responsibility has shifted into strain in our life and where fear shapes how we lead. Show us what we've taken out of habit, control, or fear, and teach us how to lead without trying to be the source. Show us rest without guilt and release without anxiety. Form us into leaders who live with clarity, humility, and faith, where we remain present, grounded, and free, and where we trust you with the outcomes and move forward with you one step at a time. Amen. If this episode resonated with you, consider sharing it with another leader who may be under more pressure than they realize. And if you want support learning how to live with responsibility without being broken by it, you can learn more at mensleadershipgodsway.com. Until next time, remember this truth: you are never meant to be a leader all by yourself. Thank you for spending time with me today on Men's Leadership God's Way. I hope this episode gave you encouragement and practical tips you can use right away. And if you would, please take a quick moment to rate and review the show on Apple or Spotify. Your support helps more men discover how to lead with awareness, courage, and confidence. And if you're ready to take the next step in your leadership journey, you can learn more about my coaching services and resources at mensleadershipgodsway.com. Until next time, let God's wisdom be a guide in every decision you make in your life.